Welcome to History in Our Backyard, the Names of Places in Georgia podcast. This podcast is produced by Leadership Johns Creek and Student Leadership North and funded in part by the Library of Congress Teaching with Primary Sources Eastern Region Program, coordinated by Waynesburg University and a Mercer University Office of the Provost Humanities Seed Grant. Thank you for your support.
Hello everyone, we are the Tallulah tribe. My name is Nishavita.
And my name is Zara.
And my name is Jagisha.
And my name is Vishal, and we welcome you to an episode about the surprisingly interesting history about Tallulah Falls.
If you're from Georgia, you probably heard of this beautiful landmark and maybe even taken a few trips there. But if you're listening from someplace else, this history is equally as intriguing and might even inspire you to visit this marvel. Hey, Zara, have you been to Tallulah Falls?
Yeah, I have actually, multiple times. Every time I've gone, I've really enjoyed the beautiful cascading waterfall, the amazing landscape surrounding the park, and the beautiful scenery all around. It really earned itself a spot as a national wonder in Georgia. Have you ever been, Michelle?
Yeah, I remember having gone there a lot when I first came to Georgia. There were a bunch of steps that I had to climb to get to the top of the waterfall, but the view was so worth the difficult walk.
Yeah, it's definitely a tough hike, no doubt about that. But like you said, the spectacular view and the amazing scenery make it all worth it in the end. Just like the falls themselves, though, the history of Tallulah Falls is a remarkable journey across what shaped Georgia in the last 200 years.
Yeah, the history behind Tallulah Falls is really an amazing look into the history of Georgia. So without further ado, let's dive deep into the history of Tallulah Falls.
So where do we start, Nishvita? 500 years ago?
Close, Sarah. To start our history of Tallulah Falls, we need to go back all the way to the first inhabitants of Georgia, the native Cherokee tribe. For hundreds of years before the United States was created, the Cherokee inhabited North Georgia and maintained the land around Tallulah Falls. Tribes around the area called the land surrounding Tallulah Falls Ugunyi, which may translate to the Roaring Waters.
That's a cool name to give to the falls.
I agree. I think it's a really great way to represent the violent nature of the falls. In fact, some tribes in the area also called the falls the Terrible, translated of course. The Cherokee viewed the falls not as benevolent, scenic beauty, but rather as a representation of the harmful and dangerous course of Mother Nature.
That makes sense. The falls are super tall and dangerous. I think they're almost 96 feet tall, making that the tallest in the collection of the Hurricane Falls.
Yep, and even today, there's a stage of the climb which is highly inclined and has 1,000 steps. It's really no wonder why the Cherokee were afraid of the falls. However, further down the road, the Cherokee had more things to be afraid of than just the Tallulah Falls.
Really? Like what?
I'm glad you asked. In 1830, disaster struck the Cherokee. The Indian Removal Act, passed by Andrew Jackson, forcibly removed the Cherokee Indians off of their land in Georgia and towards the west. But the Cherokee had legal rights to their land. In the treaty with the Cherokee, the United States directly said that all of their lands not hereby ceded.
What does that mean?
It means that the United States did not force the Cherokee to cede or take over their land.
And they still removed them from Georgia?
Sadly, yes. The United States went completely against the law to force the Cherokee off of their land. But the Cherokee did not give up so quickly. They went to court on two separate occasions, Cherokee Nation versus Georgia and Worcester versus Georgia. In Worcester versus Georgia, the court affirmed the Cherokee's rights to their lands, stating the Cherokee Nation, then, is a distinct community occupying its own territory, with boundaries accurately described in which the laws of Georgia can have no force, and which the citizens of Georgia have no right to enter, but with the assent of the Cherokee themselves.
Awesome. So did the Cherokee get to keep their land?
Unfortunately, no. Despite the court agreeing that the Cherokee had a right to their land, Andrew Jackson continued with the removal. Jackson said the now famous line, "John Marshall has made his decision, now let him enforce it."
Wow, just wow. I can't imagine the injustice the Cherokee must have felt.
Did the Cherokee respond?
Yes. John Ross, chief of the Cherokee, stood against the removal, speaking directly to Congress in his to the Senate and the House of Representatives, trying for one last time to fight against the decision. He said, "By the stipulations of this instrument, we are despoiled of our private possessions, the indefeasible property of individuals. We are stripped of every attribute of freedom and eligibility for legal self-defense. Our property may be plundered before our eyes, violence may be committed on our persons, even our lives may be taken away, and there is none to regard our complaints. We are denationalized, we are disenfranchised, we are deprived of membership in the human family."
Wow, this is so sad. Did Congress do anything?
Congress did nothing. The Cherokee were forced to embark on the lethal Trail of Tears, leaving behind Georgia and all of its natural wonders. 6,000 men, women, and children of the Cherokee died on their route west, leaving a permanent scar in their community.
Oh no, that sounds terrible. But why did Andrew Jackson and the American government do any of this? This is awful.
Well, in the 19th century, Jackson was revered as a populist president. Jackson was motivated by mostly racist sentiment that made the Cherokee and other native groups look uncivilized in the eyes of Christian Americans. In his speech on Indian removal, Jackson referred to the Indians as savages and reasoned that the Indian removal would cast off their savage habits.
He sounds insane. Why did people like him?
Well, these ideas were commonplace in America in the 1800s. People of other races were looked down upon, despite no evidence of this claim. The Cherokee, being displaced off of their land, was looked upon as a good government policy. Tallulah Falls lost its first inhabitants.
What happened next? Did anyone occupy the land after they kicked the Cherokee out?
Well, with the Cherokee gone, white settlers came and began to become introduced to the land near Tallulah Falls. Around this time, a new intellectual movement sprung up in the United States, Transcendentalism.
Ooh, I remember Transcendentalism. We learned all about it in my literature class.
Well, I didn't. Jigisha, can you give us a rundown?
Sure. Transcendentalism was a philosophical and literary movement that flourished during the early to mid-19th century, focusing on the inherent goodness of people and nature, as well as the importance of self-reliance, intuition, and individualism.
What does that mean? Could you simplify that?
Sure. The movement was all about accepting nature and finding one's true potential through being alone and living life in the solitude of one's mind.
That makes a lot more sense. So how did it affect Tallulah Falls?
Well, Transcendentalism resonated with the growing appreciation of the American wilderness as the source of spiritual renewal and artistic inspiration. The untouched beauty of the regions, like Tallulah Falls, became emblematic of these ideals, symbolizing nature, an important part of Transcendentalism. Transcendentalists believed that nature was a reflection of the divine, offering an opportunity for individuals to transcend the material world and connect with deeper spiritual truths. Ralph Waldo Emerson famously wrote in Nature that the lover of nature is he whose inward and outward senses are still truly adjusted to each other, who has retained the spirit of infancy even into the era of manhood. This idea that wilderness could evoke a childlike wonder and serve as a portal to enlightenment resonated with Americans exploring the untamed beauty of regions like Tallulah Falls.
Were there any other artists involved in this movement?
Yes, of course. Transcendentalism influenced visual artists of the Hudson River School, such as Thomas Cole and Asher Durand, who sought to depict the beauty of the American landscape. While these artists primarily focused on regions like the Hudson River Valley and the Catskills, their works paralleled the ideas of Transcendentalism by portraying nature as a divine and redemptive force. Such themes likely inspired those exploring and settling in picturesque areas like Georgia's Tallulah Falls as they began to recognize the land not just for its utility, but also for its aesthetic value.
Right. So Transcendentalism played a huge role in the creation of Tallulah Falls. What's next? Does Tallulah Falls become a state park?
Well, not exactly. Before becoming a state park, Tallulah Falls hosted a new state-of-the-art invention, a hydroelectric dam.
A dam? But why in Tallulah? And why at this time?
Well, Vishal, remember that in the early 20th and late 19th century was all about business and industry. For the developing cities in Georgia, which were growing at an exponential rate after the Civil War and Reconstruction, electricity was a must-have commodity. And we're better to extract energy than the steep rushing waters of the Tallulah rivers at Tallulah Falls. Having an in-state source of electricity helped Atlanta and other urban centers spring up during this time.
You got me hooked. How did they make the dam?
The dam was a magnificent masterpiece and an impactful change in Tallulah. The long interdredging process began in 1917 all the way to 1923. Tallulah Falls Dam main purpose was to provide electricity to Atlanta. At the time, there were Native Americans living at Tallulah Falls.
Wait, but I thought the Cherokee had been moved out of Georgia.
So yeah, even though the Cherokee had been forced out, other Native tribes were still living on the land well into the 20th century. But then, the Georgia government stepped in and decided to evacuate those people to make room for infrastructure, basically to build the dam.
Wow. So they forced them out again? That's awful.
Yeah, seriously, that's so unfair.
It really was. In 1917, once the site was cleared, construction on the dam began. And honestly, it wasn't just a small project. Building a dam back then was a huge deal. It took years, from 1917 to 1923, and required hundreds of workers. Multiple companies, including Georgia Power and other power companies across the U.S., had to work together to make it happen.
Wow, that is crazy. But why specifically Tallulah Falls?
Yeah, why not somewhere else?
Well, at the time, Georgia's cities were growing super fast after the Civil War and Reconstruction. Electricity was becoming at the time, Georgia's cities were growing super fast after the Civil War and Reconstruction. Electricity was becoming a necessity for urban areas, and the rushing waters of Tallulah Falls made it a perfect spot to generate hydropower. Once the dam was finished, Atlanta got a reliable power source, which made it easier for the city to keep growing. And honestly, it didn't just power Atlanta. It fueled the development of entire new towns and cities nearby, which created a whole new economy in the region.
That's wild. So the dam really shaped the area?
Exactly. And to make it all work, they built the Tallulah Falls power plant downstream from the plant. It was one of the first major hydroelectric facilities in Georgia. The plant is powered by this insane 6,066-foot long tunnel under Tallulah Gorge. Pretty impressive, right?
That's seriously next level engineering. But what about the environment? Did the dam mess things up?
Yeah, changing the flow of the river like that had to have some consequences.
Oh yeah, it definitely did. Building the dam changed the natural flow of the river, and parts of the valleys dried up. The falls that were once known for their powerful flow became a weaker version of their former selves. But people eventually realized how important it was to protect the falls.
Did they actually do something about it?
Yeah, in 1992, Georgia Power, the state of Georgia, and local advocacy groups formed a three-way partnership to fix things. They agreed to make scheduled water releases from the dam to restore the natural flow of the falls and bring back some of the original power. The effort led to the creation of Tallulah Gorge State Park, which officially opened in 1993.
That's actually amazing. Like, they realized their mistake and actually tried to fix it?
That's pretty rare, honestly. Usually, once something's commercialized, it's gone for good.
Exactly. The fact that they were able to restore it while still keeping the dam functional is impressive. It's one of the rare cases where conservation and industry found a way to work together.
So, Tallulah Falls is basically a Georgia's version of Niagara Falls?
Pretty much. It's even nicknamed the Niagara Falls of the South.
That's pretty cool, but was it always seen as such a big deal?
Actually, yeah. Even before it was officially recognized, it was already attracting a lot of attention. Vice President John C. Calhoun and John Howard Payne, the guy who wrote Home Sweet Home, both visited Tallulah Falls in the early 1800s.
Seriously? How'd they even find out about it back then?
Most likely from local settlers and the Cherokee.
That makes sense. The Cherokee had a deep spiritual connection to the falls. It was probably more than just a cool spot to them. It had real cultural and spiritual importance. So once people started showing up, it kind of just blew up?
Exactly.
Yeah, and once the Tallulah Falls Railroad was built, it became even more accessible. That's when things really took off. People started coming in droves. There was even a local who started handing out food and giving people a place to rest. Basically the first tourist services.
That sounds like the beginning of commercialization.
Exactly. And things escalated even more when the dam project came into the picture in the early 20th century. The construction of the dam threatened the natural beauty of the falls and completely changed the flow of the river. The falls that were once known for their powerful flow became a weaker version of what they used to be.
That's pretty sad. So what happened next?
Well, people eventually realized they had to do something about it. In 1992, Georgia Power, the state of Georgia, and local advocacy groups came together to try to fix the damage. They agreed to make scheduled water releases from the dam to restore the natural flow of the falls and bring back some of its original power.
Did it work?
Pretty much.
The history of Tallulah Falls is actually a really important example of how nature, culture, and progress all collide. It started as a sacred Cherokee land, then became the symbol of transcendentalistic thinking, and then it turned into an industrial powerhouse when they built the dam. And now it's a protected state park. That whole journey tells us a lot about how people interact with nature over time.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy how much has changed there in just a couple hundred years.
Exactly. It shows how the way we view nature has shifted so much. At first, it was seen as sacred, The Cherokee had a deep spiritual connection to the falls. Then, during the Transcendentalist era, it was appreciated for its natural beauty and artistic value. But once the dam was built, it became more about utility and development, using it as a resource rather than preserving it.
Right, and then it became about finding a balance between progress and preservation.
Exactly. That's why the partnership in 1992 was such a big deal. It showed that people were starting to understand that you can have progress without completely destroying nature. The scheduled water releases helped bring back the power of the falls while still letting the dam produce electricity. It was one of the first real examples of balancing industrial development with environmental protection.
So basically, they figured out how to have both modern infrastructure and natural beauty.
Exactly. And that's why learning about Tallulah Falls matters. It's not just about the place itself, it's about the bigger lesson. It shows us how important it is to protect these natural landmarks, not just for their beauty, but for their history and cultural significance too.
Yeah, and it's a reminder that we have to stay involved. If people hadn't spoken up in the 90s, the falls could have lost their natural flow forever.
So it's really about making sure that progress doesn't come at the cost of losing places like Tallulah Falls.
Exactly. And we can apply that same thinking to other places in Georgia if we protect and preserve them while finding ways to grow and develop responsibly. We can have both progress and preservation.
That's actually a really powerful takeaway.
Yeah, pretty inspiring, honestly.
It really is. That's why learning about the history of Tallulah Falls is so important. It teaches us that you don't have to pick between development and conservation. You can have both if you're willing to put in the work.
That's actually pretty cool.
Yeah, makes you think about how we should be approaching things today.
Exactly. That's why this history matters so much.
Thank you for listening to History in Our Backyard, the Names of Places in Georgia podcast. We would also like to acknowledge our group mates, Neil Salan, Ayush Patwari, Shreyansh Prasad. If you'd like more information about Student Leadership North, please visit our website at studentleadershipnorth.com. If you're interested in the Library of Congress's Teaching with Primary Sources program, visit their website at loc.gov. If you would like more information about Mercer University, please check out their website at mercer.edu. Thank you. We'd also like to acknowledge the websites that help make this happen: Tallulah Falls, Georgia, gastateparks.org, lodgingnorthonthelake.com. Thank you.